Welcome, everybody. In this interview, I chat with a man named David. And David is someone who has been on the Sinclair Method for 3 years now. And he came to the Sinclair Method from a background in AA. And I've known David for a couple of years and kind of been on the journey with him as he's been on the method. And I wanted to have him on because he's just such a sincere individual and he has such wisdom and perspective and great advice to share about his experience on the Sinclair Method and his transition from a sober life in AA onto this method. So I hope you enjoy this interview. Welcome, everybody. It's Katie with Embody Daily. I'm here today with a fellow TSMer, David. And I feel lucky because I think I've known you, for the better part of a couple years now and been on your TSM journey. And I am truly honored and excited that you're chatting with me today, just because I feel like every time I chat with you and learn more about your Sinclair Method experience and relationship with alcohol, you just have such good insight and wisdom to share from your experience. And you've had kind of a long road to recovery. So I'm really excited to be chatting with you today. Thank you for taking time to speak with me.
It's great to be here. Just to bounce it back at you, I've always loved what you do with Rhea Health. I've known you now, I think, for two and a half years,
Yeah,
and you have been pretty much, along my path with me since I started TSM, and I just always appreciated your sunny disposition, your optimism, and your enthusiasm for TSM. And I love that you're speaking to people about this method and all that it entails, and having other conversations about beyond TSM and we talked about this before, the twofold therapy that we think that it ultimately is. And yeah, it's great to sort of have this time to actually formally share with you my story. So thank you.
My pleasure, honestly. And so I just want to dive right in because as I said, you've had kind of a long history with recovery and even TSM. It's been like 3 years now. So let's just start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your recovery journey before the Sinclair Method?
Sure, yeah. I don't think my story is particularly unique. I consider myself a high bottom in terms of my sort of entree into recovery. There was nothing catastrophic. However, it was very disruptive and I needed to make some changes. My background is pretty typical. I come from Michigan. I hail from the Midwest, and my upbringing was very idyllic, and I come from a great family. My parents were baby boomers. They raised me with a bunch of other fellow baby boomers in Kalamazoo in like the late 70s and the 80s. And, everyone was fantastic and supportive of each other and raising kids. And, my childhood was almost like a Norman Rockwell painting. It was disgusting. I mean, we had Easter egg hunts and Halloween marches and bobbing for apples and all that crap. And, it was just a really cute, idyllic, American upbringing. And, I'm to this day very grateful that my experience as a young lad was as sweet as it was. I think genetics are a big part of AUD, which alcohol use disorder, which is what I call it now or refer to it. My parents were very jovial drinkers. When I was a young person, I remember a lot of parties at our house. A lot of people would come over and drinking was always a big part of it. It was this sort of main event. Nothing nefarious or dark about those experiences, but I just remember a lot of drinking, and I remember being very curious as a young person about alcohol. I also, was raised by, Aaron Spelling shows, which you might be too young to know these shows, but like Dynasty, Love Boat, Fantasy Island, these were sort of like real, like awesome soapy nighttime shows. 90210 was, came much later, but part of the same family. anyways, so drinking was always, you know, sort of this thing that like always pre kick-started like most fights on these soap operas. So I was like, and it was always like done in a really glamorous way. Like they throw back a glass of champagne and then she'd knock her across the table, or a slap, and she'd push her in the pool. So I always just had this like really like sort of cool obsession with what drinking was. I thought people who drank were really awesome and very glamorous. And so I was like, what is this thing that they would do? And then I would pretend to be a mixologist when I was a kid. Like most kids were playing dolls. I was like mixing cocktails with like grape juice and milk and Kool-Aid. And I just like, I don't know, I have a weird twisted mind. I wasn't like normal kids. You know, I would say probably 10 or 11. I'm not going to give you my full upbringing, but I'm going to just like, you know, start now with how alcohol came into my life. I would say probably around 10 or 11. Don't worry, drinking did not play a factor in there then. But, you know, I was a different kind of boy. I was a little effeminate. And I think I started to get information from, you know, other boys that I wasn't like other boys, and I didn't play sports. And, you know, there was this sort of self-consciousness that started to overwhelm me, this sort of otherness about me that I didn't quite understand. And, you know, I think anyone that's ever felt off the grid a little bit can sort of relate to this, is that you kind of adopt this mentality that you don't fit in, or you want to fit in, and you become sort of obsessed with trying to fit in. And, you know, I just remember as a young kid that I started to turn inward to myself. And there was this sort of wave of just kind of sadness about myself, because I felt like that I wasn't normal, and I just wanted to feel like I was a part of the in crowd. You know, then of course, as I got older and puberty settled in, you know, that whole idea of what I wasn't started to accelerate, and I started to feel even more self-conscious about myself. So I think once I finally discovered alcohol, or alcohol just, you know, discovered me, I had a mind that really needed a drink. You know, I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I was constantly worried about what others thought of me. And alcohol, from the moment that I tried it, was just this like magical elixir. Like it washed away all of my anxiety, all of my depression, and I became, or felt, powerful. I felt engaged. I felt confident around other friends at school. And so it was kind of a magical thing for me. I fortunately, coming from like a you know, a Jewish family, like fear has always been a big thing for me. So like that's where it gets complicated. Like on one hand, I loved alcohol, but I was always worried about looking intoxicated or drawing attention to myself. So I always kind of kept my interest in alcohol when I was actually drinking kind of private. It wasn't until I got to college, when everybody is sort of doing this thing, that I really started to embrace alcohol. And, you know, it's such a social lubricant to everything that you do when you're on campus, that I just was like, well, you know, this is what everyone's doing, so I'm going to do it too. And, you know, I have to say, for most of my 20s, it was pretty, it wasn't problematic at all. You know, I was always a jovial drinker. You know, I was never that person who would, like, you know, pull her skirt off over her head at a bar, or, you know, I never had that courage. I wish that I did, but I just never was that type of person that would sort of go into a blackout and lose all sense of control. But I don't know. I just think alcohol just became the thing that was so important to me, because it was what I used to relieve my anxiety. It's what I used to calm down. It's what I used to, you know, mask my depression. It helped my depression for a really long time. So it was it was a thing in my life that worked for a really long time. I would say that probably my early 30s, I started to have a conversation with myself. I think you know what that conversation is, where you start to sort of like ask yourself, am I drinking too much? Am I overdoing it? Or, are my hangover days outweighing my not hangover days? Just things like that you start to kind of question. And, I would say probably it was also around that time I started to dabble in antidepressants because, I wanted to fix some genetic challenges that I had, which is a lot of depression on my father's side. And, he was taking SSRIs or SRIs or NSRIs, I don't know. And I wanted to get in there because I felt like there were things that I was being challenged with that needed to be fixed pharmacologically. And I was a really good candidate for it. And when I started taking these medications, they were really successful in the beginning. And it was this thing where I was like, wow, this stuff really works. The problem is that when you pour Chardonnay on antidepressants, things can go haywire, and things started to go haywire for me. And I started to get more anxious and more depressed. And I think coupled with the fact that I have this penchant to drink a lot, I'm like a huge binge drinker. Like I'm not an everyday drinker. It's like, I could take a week off, I could take 2 weeks off. And it wasn't like every time I drank, it was like binge city, but I could roll with some of the heaviest drinkers imaginable. And yeah, I mean, I would say it was probably around my mid-30s when I started to consider recovery. And so that brings us up to where that journey started.
I love that you said that you are someone who has the mind that needs a drink, because that just resonates with me so much. And I think so many people can, because I hear too, people start at a young age and have challenges like you did socially or feeling inadequate or insecure. And alcohol is the thing that fixes it. And when you're so young and you equate alcohol to kind of like your tool to cope, it really messes with you. And I think a lot of people started, of course not everyone, but started at that young age. So it's just so interesting for you to frame it in that way.
I have a friend who is a school principal. So I've actually gone with him to school sometimes, and I'll get to sort of observe kids in their natural habitat. And I wouldn't say I spot problem drinkers in the making, but I can spot the mind of someone who probably needs a drink. Most kids who are, struggling with ADD or ADHD or just hyperactive kids, those are kids that really, I feel, and this is a whole other conversation we can get into later, but I feel like could use some really early intervention on, problems that could come up later, where I think a lot of people who have minds like I do, we don't go to alcohol because we're looking to screw up our lives. We're looking for relief. We're looking for something to quiet our minds down. And I think a lot of kids, I think a lot of kids experiment and kids sow oats and then they calm down and then they move on. But some kids who have already had pre-existing issues with the way their mind operates, alcohol becomes very important. Yeah. And it was a tool that I used to help me with a lot of issues that I was facing.
Yeah.
So yeah, like it's a beautiful thing when it works, but then, like everything like it stops working, and then, problems begin.
Yeah. Well, so I want to talk about kind of your recovery journey once you started trying to fix your problems with alcohol. So I know you've been on TSM for 3 years, and we'll kind of get into that. But first, I wanted to hear about your experience with AA, because I know you spent time in that program, and I know there were things that were really beneficial to you and that you've learned and applied through TSM as well that you learned from AA. So I'm just curious if you wanted to speak a little bit about your recovery journey and how that started, when you started AA and then the transition to TSM.
Yeah, I live in Los Angeles. There's, I mean, we're in a pandemic right now, so, everything's on Zoom, but in normal times, you can't walk 5 feet without, stepping near around an AA meeting. I mean, there's so much recovery here. So having lived here for as long as I have, half of my friends were in AA, half of my friends have been sober for a really long time, have dabbled with it. And so I've just known about that traditional program for a really long time. And, I just want to say this out front because I do need to talk about it. It's part of my story. I don't know how to talk about it and not talk about it, but like, I don't want to suggest to anyone who likes AA or is in AA watching this that I am dogging on AA or I'm in any way critical of it as an institution, because for a lot of people that I know, it does work. And I know people who have been sober for 25, 30 years would not be here without it, and they've said that to me. So I just want to say that out front, but it ultimately proved to not be my path. And that itself was a really complicated, frustrating, really arduous process for me. And I'm always been the type of person that when confronted with a problem, I look for the solution, and I'm given this is what it is. This is what you have to do. And you fix it and you move on with your life. I mean, I've always been pragmatic about things like that, but for this was one of those situations for me where I had an issue. I knew I needed to address it. I went to the place that you were told you're supposed to go, and I was very diligent about doing what was asked of me, but it wasn't working for me for a couple of reasons. But I did stay sober for 2.5 years with AA, and I did everything that I was supposed to. I had a sponsor, I had a sponsee, I had done the 12 steps, I had had commitments at various meetings. I mean, I really ingratiated myself as best as I could. Looking back, I probably could have done things a little bit better, but I will say what I did appreciate about AA and what I got out of it was there was a sense of structure. There was a formality to it. I liked the fact that there were rules. And I also liked the fact that there was this space that you could walk into and you could, without even speaking it, you could have this shared experience with people who are sort of coming from the same place you are. I mean, that's fellowship. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think for that, I miss it. I think about it sometimes. And, we've talked about this with TSM. I mean, it's like, it's happening. And, you're doing wonderful things with like having these weekly groups and these Zoom meetings, and things are starting to kind of build, but it's crumbs for me, compared to living in Los Angeles and just like the vast opportunity of recovery that's out there. And when you turn on TV or when you turn on Facebook and people are sort of announcing their 2 years or their 5 years or their 10 years, which they absolutely have every right to do that, you do sort of take in that is the dominant treatment for recovery. That is the solution. That is the only way. And anything else that deviates from that in any way, that's problematic. And so for me, with having had the experience in AA it was much more complicated than I'm going to make it sound, but recognizing this isn't working, and I'll tell you why it wasn't working, and then making the change, and then finding the self-esteem to have the courage to say, actually, no, I am in recovery and this way is just as legitimate and I'm going to do it this way. And, finding that confidence, which has always been a reoccurring theme in my life, with every challenge that I've had, I've always had to sort of like, from the ground up, build my self-esteem and confidence that no, I have a purpose and I have the right to my own thoughts and my own ways of treating whatever it is that I'm challenged by. And it's been a constant struggle, but yeah, that was a very complicated path for me. But like I said, I have so many friends that are in it, that love it, and I think, in my experience, my exploration with TSM hasn't tarnished any of the friendships that I've had in AA. So, you know, I'm pretty lucky.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did I answer your question?
You totally did. Yeah.
Okay.
And I appreciate you for giving that context. And I know since I've known you, I've always known you were in AA, and you've always talked respectfully about the program. And I feel the same too. Like, I think I shared with you last time we spoke, you know, if Weight Watchers doesn't work for you, there are other weight loss programs to try. And I hope that we can start viewing treatment that way, because it is a legitimate treatment, the Sinclair Method. It's evidence-based. And if AA works for people, that's great, but let's also have other options. So I want to hear from you. What was the transition like then from AA to TSM? Yeah, just tell us about that.
Honestly, I would rather jump out of an airplane without a parachute than ever go through that transition again. And I say that having walked into an AA meeting, and that was less scary than walking out of an AA meeting and saying, I'm done. No, it was so frightening. I would rather set myself on fire than ever have to go through that experience again. And it had nothing to do with, honestly, the people. It was the principles of the program. And it really was in the sort of, you know, they do have a passage that said, if you do find another way, we do tip our hat off to you. But like, so many people relapse in AA. So many people start drinking again, and it is disastrous. And I had to contend with the idea that what I was doing wasn't relapsing, it was just changing treatments. But most people just leave AA and then just start drinking again. And some people are okay. I haven't seen it. I've heard some people are okay just leaving AA, but most of the people that I know that have left AA, it's been disastrous. And, you know, for me, I've learned a lot about alcohol use disorder. I do think it is a disorder. I do think that you never not have it. I consider myself just not taking one pill away from absolutely going right back to where I was when I started in original recovery, because my mind is still a binge drinker at heart. And my mind wants me to drink how I used to drink. Not so much anymore because of Naltrexone, because I've had so much experience with the medication, but I know without it, it will rewire and it will program my mind to start drinking the way it used to. It just does. I mean, that's just a science. And, you know, I am grateful that I've had the 2.5 years in traditional recovery to know that what my life was going to look like if I stopped taking naltrexone. A lot of people don't have that. I wish they did have that foundation, because then we could get people to take their pills and be compliant every single time they drink, which I know is a challenge for Claudia when coaching, and you know, and Michelle, who does some of the TSM meetings. Anyway, I digress. So once I was 2.5 years sober, two things were happening. One, I was more depressed than I was when I started. I couldn't figure out why. I had done everything I was supposed to. My life looked exactly the same, except I wasn't drinking, but I was miserable. The other thing that was happening was my craving for alcohol, for some strange reason, was more pronounced than it was before I got sober. And it wasn't until I learned about the alcohol deprivation effect that I realized that what I was actually suffering from was not a lack of commitment to what was being asked of me in the program. Because when I would say, like, to my fellows, I was like, look, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to. I'm 2.5 years. Why am I craving alcohol more than I did when I started? And, you know, the answer was, you know, well, maybe you need to pray on it, or maybe you need to, like, take more commitments or get into action, you know, get another sponsee. And I'm just like, I think there's something there's something chemically happening inside me. Like, I'm not a crazy person, but you know, it's like, you know, when something's wrong with you, like something is not right inside your body. And I didn't understand. And it wasn't until I read Escapa's book, The Cure for Alcoholism, that I was able to recognize that this situation that I was in was not only common, it was inevitable. So did not know about the Sinclair Method at that point, but I was 2.5 years. I remember I was on Netflix, and I was pretty much resolved that I was going to just stay miserable and sober for the rest of my life, or try to not be miserable. But, I just, outwardly it looked fine. Like, I was going to work, I was showing up, I had a smile, a permagrin on, but inside I was just becoming more and more isolated within myself. I saw this documentary on Netflix, and it was called One Little Pill, and it was, the Claudia Christian documentary, and it talked about the science behind alcohol use disorder and what an opiate blocker can do to help that in the immediate, but also over time, biologically change your interest in alcohol, because the naltrexone is blocking those endorphins from strengthening those neural pathways. Like all this like scientific stuff that I thought was crazy. I also thought it was crazy. It was like, an actress, because I'm like, oh great, an actor's gonna fix my life. Great, here we go. And but when with that combined with her TED Talk, which I saw on YouTube, I'm like, okay, this is really interesting. I tried to talk about it with some of my fellows in AA, and they were like, no, this is ridiculous. This is crazy. And I was like, wait, look, I am a big book person too. Like it says, science may one day find a cure. It hasn't happened yet. This looks scientific. Can we talk about this? And they're like, no. I have 25 years of sobriety. If I find out there's a pill on the market that's going to fix my alcoholism, I'm going to be effing pissed. So I don't want to talk about it. So I was like, shit, I don't know what to do here. I'm in a pickle. So, I went home for Thanksgiving, and I got to see my parents, and they knew I was in AA. They were surprised that I had, been in AA in the first place, because I was so secretive about my problems. But I explained to them, I was like, listen, I've been doing this for 2.5 years. I feel like something isn't working. This was presented to me. What do you think? And, like my parents, they're awesome. They, they've had their own challenges with alcohol, and they're like, let's look at this. And we watched it together, and, my dad's like, this is crazy, but it seems scientific, it seems logical. Why don't we find you or support you in helping you find a specialist who deals in this practice? Let's not make this answer on your own, and let's get you some sort of like clinician support here, like with a real doctor. And so I found an addiction specialist who practices in traditional abstinence, but also supports, how is it described? Alternate treatments for alcohol use disorder. And I was like, interesting. I had heard of Smart Recovery, but I never went to a Smart Recovery meeting. But so I went to see him. He was like, let's talk about your past history with alcohol. I want to know, your family history. I want to know what your drinking was like, and I want to know, where you are now with your treatment. And so we talked for an hour, and he said, I think you're actually probably a really good candidate for this. And he was like, if you feel that you are craving alcohol more than not, and you feel like that this is something that you want to treat differently, with a medical option, I will support that. And so he prescribed my prescription. He prescribed me a 30-day supply of naltrexone. I waited 30 days. I told all of my AA friends this is what I was going to be doing. I mean, I did everything but save out the date cards. Like, and I tried to find a section in Hallmark where that says, relapsing. Here's the date. But no, I did. Because I have such an obsessive mind. I was like, if I'm going to do this, I want to do this right. Like it has to feel like recovery. This can't feel like some willy-nilly whim. So, after 30 days, after I had sort of made sure that my sponsee had a new sponsor, and my sponsor and I were still good, and he was really He said, David, listen, I love you. I'm not convinced of this, but I'm convinced of you. And you need to do what you need to do. And I want you to know that I hope that I'm the first person that you can call if for whatever reason this isn't working, that you need to try it this way again. And I was like, that is so cool, and that to me is what real recovery looks like. That is the compassion that is so important in recovery, is that we're all just trying to get to the top of the mountain here. And can we all just sort of like stop judging each other and supporting each other? And, I just was so grateful that that was his answer to me, and he's still in my life and he's still supportive of me. And, anyway, so I filled the prescription. I came home, I poured a glass of wine, I took the pill, I waited an hour, and, I tried the glass of wine, and it was weird. My mind felt differently on it. And I wasn't, the way I describe it to people who want to know what it feels like to be on naltrexone, like in drinking, I always describe it as like riding a bike up a hill without any air in the tires. Like you can get to the top, like I can feel buzz, but it just doesn't feel like it does when, you're not taking naltrexone. It's harder to get there. It's less interesting.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So
it's my way. Yeah.
When did you start TSM? I know it's about 3 years ago. And kind of what was it like, early on in your experience with it? And what, talk about some challenges maybe that were in there as well.
Yeah. So I immediately noticed that I felt differently when I drank on it. I was scared to drink. Like I was so scared because here I am engaging in the very behavior that you're not supposed to make myself better. Like that is rationally, intellectually makes no sense whatsoever. But scientifically, when you think about the way it's supposed to work and it has to work, that's what you got to do. In order to become uninterested in something, you have to engage in that very thing while the medication is biologically changing your relationship to how you feel about it. So the first few times I tried it, I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like this actually works. I don't, and people are like, well, what does it feel? What is it like to not think about alcohol? People who aren't alcoholic or have AUD. And I'm like, well, I'm the kind of person that when you go out for dinner and there's one bottle of wine, I was always looking to see how much was left in the bottle and who at the table had their second glass before this girl had her second glass. If we were going to order a second bottle, if we don't order a second bottle, do I need to stop at the wine store on the way home and get a bottle for my, like that's where my mind goes with drinking. But when I was taking naltrexone, and I would wait, I no longer was thinking about that bottle of wine at the table anymore. I was sort of like pulled into the conversation at the table. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, I'm actually listening to what she's saying and I'm caring and I'm nodding, but I'm actually like in it and I'm responding to her. And then I get up and I look back at the bottle and there's still like a third of it left. Like, I'm like, what the heck? Who is this person? Like, you know what I mean? Like that was just never my experience. I don't know about you, but like this sort of, yeah, like, it's just like, I'm always, whenever I'm drinking, I was always thinking about the next drink or, how many drinks should I drink tonight? Like, should I drink 3? Can I drink 4? If I drink 4, can I push back that meeting, an extra hour? So I have that hour to go to the gym, all that chatter that goes on in your mind, which is alcohol use disorder. And by the way, if anyone's watching this who has that chatter and isn't sure if they have a drinking problem, you have a drinking problem if that's the chatter in your mind. So anyway, here's where it got tricky though. Like the mind is a very powerful thing. And once my mind knew that I was drinking again, it was like, oh, we're back, game on. I'm not going to let a pill get in the way of me drinking how we like to drink. So I would say within a week, after, still taking naltrexone, I got wasted one night, like blackout drunk. And I woke up the next morning and I was like, what happened? I just detonated a bomb. And I was so terrified. And I called up my addiction specialist. I was like, you promised me this was going to work. And he was like, no, I didn't promise you this was going to work. And, you know, I was like really scared because I'm like, here I am like doing this thing. I left AA. I made a big stink about it. Like, you know, am I going to walk in with my tail between my legs? And, you know, he was just like, listen, like, you know, how long did it take for you to become a problem drinker? And I said, okay, like, he's like, I get 10 to 15 years. He's like, okay, how long have you been on TSM? I'm like 3 days. And he was like, let's give it a little bit more time before we throw in the towel, can we? And I was just like, this guy's crazy. He wants me to keep drinking, you know? And I realized that he didn't want me to keep drinking. He wanted me to continue with this treatment, you know, the treatment of naltrexone. I mean, it was like, just thinking about the doctor making this suggestion is, now that I'm on the other side of it, brilliant, smart, forward thinking, ahead of the curve. Then looking, you know, when I was then in the middle of it, I was like, this guy is crazy. Anyway, so I would say I went back and I started drinking on naltrexone. I would say probably like, it was about 6 months in when I was charting my drink units, because I was keeping a drink log, which was all I was doing, by the way, because, you know, in TSM, we have these logs and we keep the drink units. And I would say probably within 6 months, I looked at my chart and it was like, oh, like my units are definitely going down. This is crazy. And, you know, then my alcohol-free days were insane. Like my alcohol-free days were like 5-6 days. And, you know, it was like one of those things where I was like, wow, 6 months in, all right, I'm gonna keep going. And the more that my brain kept trying to drink past what the naltrexone wasn't allowing, it was like, once it's, after so much repetition and it stopped trying to get what it thought it was gonna get, it started to give up. And it was like, all right, I guess we're not gonna be drinking like this anymore. And I would say probably about 1.5 years, I started to possibly consider I was reaching extinction. And then I had a dip again. And I was like, what's going on here? So your next question is obviously like, what do you think was happening there that, you know, caused the dip?
Yeah, I'm super curious because you had kind of success early on and then you kind
Then
of,
I didn't.
yeah, and then you didn't. So let's talk about what happened there and kind of what you've learned from it. Because I know we've talked extensively about you realizing after 3 years on this method that this is really not just about taking this pill, though it is a biological addiction. It's much more than that. So what happened when you had that kind of dip again, and what have you learned from it?
Well, so I had a dip again, and I started, you know, my units started to go up, and I called my, you know, addiction specialist, and I said, you know, I need to come see you, and I need to, you know, be transparent about what's going on. And, you know, he said to me, he goes, you know, let's table the drinking for a minute. Like, talk to me about your therapy. What's going on with your experience with like seeing a psychologist? Are you guys doing cognitive behavior therapy? Are you getting into the why you drink the way you drink? Like, he was asking me all these questions and I didn't have any answers for him because I wasn't doing any therapy. And I said to him, I was like, to be perfectly honest with you, like, I really just was so excited that I could drink again. I didn't even think about therapy. Like, it never dawned on me that that was a part of the treatment. And he goes, well, when you were in AA, what did you think you were doing there? I mean, you had step work, you had a sign. I mean, there were things that I'm like, what do you think that was? And I was like, well, yeah, that's true. He was like, I wouldn't expect that you would have even had any success with this, considering what you haven't done. And I was just like, oh, okay. So with my tail between my legs, I was like, all right, I gotta go back to, I gotta go to therapy. And it wasn't until I really delved into how I had used alcohol my whole life as a tool to mask my, you know, lack of self-esteem and self-worth, my anxiety triggers, my depression, how I used it as a social tool to engage with other people. Until I did all the interior work, I don't know why I thought this was going to work. I mean, you know, it certainly fixes the craving for alcohol, but it doesn't fix all the other stuff. And it wasn't until that I started to do that work that things really then started to change for the first time. And, you know, there were two issues that I was struggling with a year and a half in. The first was the therapy issue, which is I needed to do that sort of interior work and reflection. And the other issue was this, I felt so ashamed to be doing TSM. Like, I knew that it worked, or I knew that it had its success, but I felt like everybody was doing it the righteous way. And whenever I would turn on like Access Hollywood and, you know, they do some story on some famous actor celebrating 20 years, it was this reminder of like the way I was doing it. And the fact that I was doing something to manage my drinking, like all this stuff that I was doing that is basically like wrong to do, I felt ashamed, and I felt like I was a fool. And talking about it with people, it just was one of those things where I was like, I'm never going to get on the other side of this. Like the struggle is not going, the struggle that's going to kill me is not the actual drinking. It's the lack of self-esteem that I have about TSM. So, you know, right at the beginning of the pandemic, oh, actually, no, it was a couple months before the pandemic. I was in one of our TSM sessions and I met Michelle, and she said to me, you know, based on, you know, how you're feeling about yourself, you know, I think you could benefit from, you know, what our treatment program offers, which was Lion Rock. And, you know, like it's basically functions like, you know, I think Rhea Health does, but it's basically an environment where you are with a clinician one-on-one who supports alternate ways of treatment and recovery. And once I got in there and I got assigned my clinician who was 9 years sober and, you know, said to me, I am someone who is 9 years sober and will continue to be sober for reasons that have nothing to do with you. I'm here to tell you what you're doing is legitimate, and I have seen massive success with your way of doing it. And we're going to get you to feel confident about that. And that's what we did for the next 6 months. And that was the focus of our therapy. And I honestly, like, I am so grateful that not only did I have traditional therapy where I was focusing on the interior work of why I drink, but then the other component of the therapy was about, you know, like, you know, feeling confident about TSM and you know, having that self-esteem. So I think once I was able to do all that work, I would say, you know, I started TSM in, I think, 2016. So no, 2017. So I'm 3 years in, and you know, I think I've reached. I mean, I think I've reached what my, from here on out, which we can talk about later. What does my drinking look like now? But I think I've reached the point of what I think, you know, my relationship to alcohol is going to look like for the rest of my life.
That's
if
amazing.
It changes, yeah. And the other thing I just want to say, and you know, if it's to change tomorrow, I now have the tools, or at least I have the, you know, the awareness to say, all right, there's clearly something going on here. Something slipped. I know where to go. You know, I know how to get the support that I need.
Something you said the last time we spoke to that really resonated with me when you kind of hit that dip on the Sinclair Method was you were giving a scenario of like you'd be out having drinks and you'd have 2 or 3 and literally feel satiated and not want more, but your brain would say, nope, I'm going to push through and keep drinking with the crowd or otherwise. Can you talk more about, you know, what was happening there? Because I think a lot of people struggle with that, where they're compliant and they're taking the pill and they don't really want to drink, but they're kind of pushing through anyway, kind of like how you might eat even though you're full. So can you talk more about that experience?
When I have those moments, and I do have them, I'm able to step away from that experience of reflecting on my drink units from the night before and saying, all right, you know, you had 4 drinks tonight. What's going on? And it's usually because I've let other things in my life fall to the wayside, i.e. exercise, meditation, which I do really badly, you know, endorphin-inducing activities that are supposed to replace a lot of those drinking activities, all that stuff that is in support of replacing a lot of drinking habits, I usually have let slip. And I find that because I'll have those moments where with naltrexone, when I take the pill, wait an hour, have the drink, if I get the satisfaction of what a drink does for me, it relaxes my mind, it slows the gears down, it gives you that thing that it gives you that thing which is the very reason we drink in the first place, which is just like, if after 2 drinks, I'm still going because I'm satiated after a drink and a half to 2 drinks, something is lacking, something is not happening in my life to where I'm able to say wholeheartedly, that I'm doing everything I've been doing in support of what ultimately TSM should be doing. I've never had an occasion, not once, where I drank too much, where I've been able to not pinpoint to, where my life is at and say, okay, this dropped off or this dipped or this fell aside and, fell to the wayside, where I can say that this isn't it's the medication that isn't working, or it's TSM. It's obviously, it's got to be something else going on, because I will tell you, like, if you give yourself permission to allow yourself to do, I think, what is asked of us in TSM, which is the therapy and the self-reflection and the CBT, the cognitive behavior therapy, all that stuff. Like, if you're doing all of that and you're still you're still finding time to drink in excess, something isn't working. Something is off. I mean, I would be hard pressed to meet anyone that's doing all that stuff and still having a problem with their drinking.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's such an important piece that we kind of throw out. We just, oh, the pill's going to do it for us. And it's amazing because it gives you that space where before you would never be able to pause after 2 drinks, or at least I wouldn't, and be like, do I really want another one? Or why am I going? Like, I would just be like, screw it, I'm finishing this bottle and then some. So it gives you that space, but we have to engage in the treatment and I guess take some level of responsibility there for our actions and realize what it is that's pushing us to keep drinking in the ways that we have.
I think the one of the falsehoods of TSM is that this is a permission to drink with abandon. This is a way to treat a behavior condition, not a disorder, not a behavior, but a disorder issue that you have. And the way I sort of rationalize it to people who are struggling to take the medication, sometimes not wanting to take the medication, I always say to them, I'm like, wait a second, like, what if you were given a diagnosis of diabetes and your doctor said, I need you to take this insulin on a like every single time when you're supposed to, because if you don't take your insulin, you're going to die. Most diabetics aren't going to not take their insulin, and if you have other conditions that need medical pharmacological support, like if you have HIV, or you have to take certain medications every day, and we need to sort of treat this as the exact same thing, which is that we're never not going to have AUD. I know you don't drink anymore because that's what, that's one of the options with TSM. But people that do drink on it, I mean, I take this very seriously. I mean, I'm sitting here sharing this with you because TSM has offered me this like really awesome life in recovery where my days are filled with like books and social engagements and physical activities, and I'm not in meetings anymore, and I don't have to do that stuff, but I have a responsibility to myself. I cannot not take this seriously. And yeah, I mean, I know that, you speak to a lot of people who want this to work for themselves. I mean, do you find that when you're talking to them and they're saying this isn't working, are you able to sort of like figure out like other things that's not going on in their life or things that they're doing that is not really supporting what this method ultimately needs in order for it to work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even a lot of people are aware of that. Like they're like, oh, I hate my job, so I'm drinking every day, but I'm doing it compliantly, or
Yeah.
or people that might blame the method or say the naltrexone isn't working. And granted, it doesn't work for everybody, but they'll blame it and say, oh, this isn't working, when really there are opportunities for growth or reflection or improvement. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend like, oh, it's just really simple, like do some self-reflection and heal the trauma inside you and build new hobbies and all these things. It takes engagement and active work every single day. And like, I think for me, like starting really small and just taking tiny steps toward those changes is what's the best thing. Because I think when you're drinking every single night and that's what you've always done, trying to transition or envision a life that isn't that, it's really scary. Even though it's destructive, it's unfamiliar. And so it's almost more comforting to keep drinking as we always have. Sure, you're compliant with the pill, but you're still drinking more. But taking that transition to a new life, it just seems like it's too much work. And so taking those baby steps are the thing that I've found to be most helpful for people. And it sounds like that's what you got in the program, is just some more like self-awareness and reflection on what you were doing, as opposed to just automatically taking the pill, drinking, doing what you've always done. It's like, no, there's got to be some real changes here in how I'm viewing alcohol and how I'm using it in my life. Is that true for you?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll tell you what, for me, my narrative is, it used to be, I've had the worst day ever. I'm going to just drink to forget, my miserable day, or I'm so stressed out with my boss, or I'm so frustrated with, I don't have kids, but like, you've heard all of these excuses for the reasons why people drink. Like those are root problems that need to be uncovered, because there are a lot of people who have all of those same issues that don't use alcohol alcoholically as that solution. And until we, as people who all face those challenges, really sort of like find new methods to combat those anxieties, that I just think there's a behavior component, there's a habit component that's always going to, it's alcohol. It's like when you're drinking alcohol, you just stop making good decisions for yourself. And, I'm not going to lie and say that, I no longer, I don't enjoy it. And, in moderation, it's not a pleasurable thing. It is, but I do know that no great choices or decisions I've made have ever come out of having alcohol in my system. And I have found through, exhausted therapy, and I'm, still continue, and I'm by no means do I feel like I'm there yet, but I have found when I find other ways of managing my stress and anxiety, not using alcohol, like just the sustainability factor of like having that foundation in my life. So is like, there's such a growth experience with that. And it's such a sustainable way of living than always having in the back of your mind, I have a drink to kind of wash all of that stuff away. Because, as we all know, like drinking does not change the circumstances of your life. And, the same problems you had for the reasons you drink are still going to be there on the other side of that cocktail. So, I always just say, to people who are struggling with that, and I want to be compassionate and say, look, I put a lot of work into this shit, and I've done a lot of those sort of self-reflections. So when people are struggling with this, I'm right there with them. And I'm like, listen, I get where you are and I love where you're at, but take that opportunity and really make that change. Because the beautiful thing about TSM, what I love about TSM, is that it gives you that choice. And once you have that choice back, there's just so much further you can go with yourself in terms of managing a life that doesn't use alcohol to fix your problems.
I want to ask you, because I've kind of viewed it as like when you go to the gym and you're working on a muscle, like as far as building up new coping mechanisms.
The way I do, clearly.
Yeah. The way you're ripped and everything, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, of course.
But like as far as building new coping mechanisms, at first it's uncomfortable. It doesn't feel like it's working. It's painful. you know, kind of like trying to go to the gym for the first few times or whatever. But the more you do it, the more it becomes like second nature. You see the fruit of your labor and you're like, oh my gosh. And this is so empowering to be able to have a crappy day at work and be like, I don't even need a drink, nor do I want a drink. And when I was drinking a lot, I used to look at people who were stressed and not drinking, thinking, oh, they must want a drink, but they're just resisting it. But now I don't even think of alcohol when I've had a crappy day or a bad thing happens, because my coping muscle is so much stronger, and it's second nature for me to watch a movie or go for a walk or something else that it, like you were saying, it's much more sustainable, and it builds each day. You're able to cope in different ways. It just kind of builds the stronger foundation for a better life. So I'm curious if it feels that way for you, and if you could talk about what that's been like to kind of relearn new ways to cope. Because I mean, as you were saying earlier, you started using alcohol to cope at a very young age, so that must have been challenging.
I would be lying if I said one of the interests of TSM in the very beginning was that I could drink again. I mean, that was sort of like this, like, oh, I could do this thing again that, like, you know, I'm told that I can never do again. And, you know, I was really like excited about that. I denied it, but I mean, I knew in my mind that was the reason. Once I could go back to drinking again, and, you know, I don't know if it's just age, getting older, but I realized that, you know, I think as you get older, you know, and you start to realize that your old ways of coping with things no longer work, and they're not sustainable. And I found for me that, you know, having 2, 3, 4, 5 drinks in a night and then not having that next day, and what that does to my self-esteem and self-worth, you know, like I feel like my hangover days were so much more detrimental than my actual drinking days, because just, you know, the punishing feeling that you feel about yourself. I mean, it is a depressant, so you're depressed and you're not motivated, you're not sharp, you're not at your best. I mean, if you have kids, you're irritated. And then they don't understand what a hangover is, so they just think they're irritating. You know, like as I did. You know, you're not living a full life. And I think, given that choice now, you know, I find myself in a really great position where I no longer feel that choice is no longer, like, I feel like I'm not longing to have that choice. Like, I do have that choice, but I'm just naturally, biologically, mentally choosing not to drink, because I want to feel good, and I want to be sharp, and I want to be at my very best. I mean, I don't know how you feel. You know, I don't know if I answered your question, but, like, I mean, I was going to ask you a question, because, you know, you're sober, you don't drink anymore. Do you feel like, though, having that choice, if you did want to have a drink, feels less stressful for you than, like, being in a situation where, like, you knew that if you picked up a drink, you'd lose everything? And some people do, but I'm just saying, in the structure of traditional recovery, the worst thing you can possibly do is pick up a drink. Not having that anxiety, do you feel like that makes your choice of not drinking less stressful or more interesting to you? Not to throw it back to you, but that's always a question I've had of you.
Definitely. I mean, I still have naltrexone, and it's still an option for me to drink. And I, like, 99.999% of the time, I don't want to drink. And it's really interesting, because just 2 weeks ago, I was in Sonoma, and that was a huge, like, drinking place for me, where we have friends that, like, have a huge wine cellar, and it was just, like, the best wine. And so we would go there, and I would get wasted. For years I did that. And I went back this year. I think it was, like, the first time I've been back since I quit drinking, and I was having a desire to drink, not at a craving level, but just being in this environment. Like, maybe I would have benefited from an extinction session there, but I didn't. It was, like, more of a passing thought than a real urge to drink. But I hadn't been in that type of environment where the urge to drink was there in so long. I just don't even think about it anymore. Like, I've never been a smoker, and so I never think about smoking a cigarette. It just doesn't even occur to me. And so but I do think having that option, because, like I said, I have naltrexone. There's a reason I haven't thrown it out. Like, I love to have that option. And I'm reading this book, actually, Beyond Addiction, How Science and Kindness Help People Change. I know it's on the C3 Foundation website. They recommend it, but it talks about that, where when people feel like they have choice, they're more empowered to change and do things differently. And so that's what I love about the Sinclair Method too, is it gives you that option. And for me, it was, when I first started, it was as same as you. Like, I was like, oh great, I still get to drink, even though I've got this huge problem, I can drink in a way that's more manageable. And so that was really exciting. And I think, like, the fewer barriers we put in front of people to get into recovery, because when you're addicted to alcohol, it's like your best friend. Like, to think of letting that go, you're like, I would rather live a life as a drunk than give it up. Like, at least that's how I was. I was like, I can't imagine letting this go. But TSM gradually let me fall out of love with it. And I was like, oh, I don't like you anymore. Okay, I can leave this now. But all this to say, yes, it's to have the option. It's I think really helped me to actually maintain sobriety, even as funny as that sounds, just because it's there. I can have it if I want it, but I don't want it.
I'm so glad you said that. Like, that's such a brilliant thing you said about people coming into recovery, because this is something I've been thinking about a lot, which is, I think there's such an awareness now in pop culture and in medicine and just like in social media, or just in everyday conversation. There's so much conversation about addiction and I think the stigma is being lifted, but I think the treatment of it is still fucked. And I think, like, how we're helping people is still wrong. And I think doctors are really screwing this up. And that's a change I would like to see, because I'm not a doctor, but I am convinced that so many people wait so long to challenge or fix their problem with drinking because they know that the abstinence model is waiting for them. And it's that fear and anxiety that keeps people in their cups way longer, way years longer than they absolutely need to be. I think the minute someone feels or even has that first conversation with themselves is like, I think I'm drinking too much, they should be able to go to their doctor and say, I think I'm drinking too much. And their doctor should be able to just say, you know what? I don't think you are. I know you are because you're telling me. We need to get you going on a path. Here's naltrexone. Let's try it this way. If it doesn't work this way, we'll go to plan B. Like, if doctors aren't starting that early with their patients, and patients don't feel like they can have that conversation without the fear of having to never drink again, we're not supporting people. We are not helping people. And I just think that so many people, thousands and thousands of people, would be so helped by this treatment, or at least the option to get on this road to recovery, so much sooner if we just take away this, like, never again model.
I totally agree. And I get emails every week from people who say that either their doctor tells them they don't have a drinking problem, that, oh no, you should be fine. Or, the really common issue of, no, I'm not going to give you naltrexone, you need to go to AA. And so I get emails all the time. So this probably happens a lot more than we even realize. And it's really heartbreaking, and why I'm so grateful to the C3 Foundation for providing the directory of doctors and more doctors coming online. I'm just like, that's life-changing.
I would like to be, like, part of that change in any way that I can, because I think once, as we've been talking and I've been having conversations with other TSMers and C3 people, is like, once we start to broaden our mind, the potential of this treatment, like, I think the potential of really getting this medication out there in the world and the support that it can give people and the intervention that it can offer is incredible. Like, I mean, I want to see this on college campuses, like next to the condom machine, like, so many kids are like condom machines, but like, I'm like, it's like the 90s or something, but like, there's all this sort of like, safe sex advertisement that we put to these young kids. It's kind of like, why aren't we talking to them about the dangers of binge drinking? Yeah. I mean, there's this whole narrative happening on college campuses with sexual assault. Well, you know what? 7 times out of 10, I think alcohol is probably involved in a lot of these assaults. So it's kind of like, why aren't we offering kids an opportunity to address this thing that they're doing, which is, I get it, it's a rite of passage. It's this thing that every kid wants to go to college and do. But, if you're giving kids the freedom to drink that much alcohol without any type of support, these things are going to continue to keep happening because, kids go in brownouts, kids go in blackouts. It's crazy. And so that's kind of like what's great about being here. I'm able to share with you my story and like talk about it, like as that was sort of like the first step of where I was at with my recovery. Like the second phase of my recovery, like that's kind of where I'd like to move into, which is sort of being sort of like, for lack of a better word, some agent of change in the addiction recovery narrative, which is like, I really want people who really who are probably already getting the wheels going in their mind, that they don't want to use alcohol the way they've been using it, an option to sort of like get on that path. But I don't know. It's gonna take a lot of effort on a lot of parts of a lot of different organizations to make that happen. But I mean, it's happening.
It is happening, yeah, and we're kind of at the early stage of it.
It's happening.
It is. It'll be a snowball effect. And by you sharing your story, I mean, that's huge. And again, I just love the way that you phrase things. You're so eloquent and just insightful, and I appreciate your perspective on things.
Well, I appreciate you letting me share my story. And I just want to say, like, lastly, and I just wanted to make sure that I said this because, the reason why I wanted to share this story is not because I like to hear myself talk. It's because, if anyone is out there sort of in my position, if anyone's out there who loves traditional recovery, I'm so proud of you. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't change a thing. Keep going. You're awesome. But if anyone's out there who's stuck in this weird purgatory and they don't know how to make a change, or they're feeling guilty because they're having legitimate issues with how they're feeling with respect to the alcohol deprivation effect, I just want people to know you're not alone. There is something else out there for you. There are resources. The last thing that I want you to do is punish yourself. And, that's what I want people to get from my story, is that, I found something else that worked, and, my life is okay, and there are options.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. And I wanted to still ask you, because I know you've mentioned that you were at Extinction. And so I wanted to ask you, what does Extinction feel like for you after being on TSM for 3 years and you're finally feeling like you're there? What led you there, and how do you know that you're there?
It's a very good question. I don't think this is a linear path. I think there are peaks and valleys. I think that I have Extinction, but I might not, I might have those dips again that we've talked about. I'm a human being. Like it's just the very nature of this thing. But I know that here I am having a conversation with you about alcohol, but I don't think about alcohol like I used to. I don't use alcohol like I used to. I have a life that's very full. Alcohol is not the main event of my life anymore. And to have that freedom, it's in hindsight, everything I ever wanted, which is just to not have it sort of dominate my life in, not even so much when I'm drinking it, but when I'm not drinking it and just thinking about it. Like, I don't want to have that real estate in my mind consumed by, all these struggles that I'm told are mutually exclusive to alcohol use. And I just don't think that's true. I think people have anxieties and people have struggles and frustrations and deep character defects, but I don't think that's necessarily symptomatic to a person's inability to control their drinking or not. I think these are separate issues, and I like that things are on shelves now as they're supposed to be. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did.
Okay.
Thank you. So I want to just kind of start wrapping up here, but still kind of get a little bit more information from you. So I want to hear from your perspective, were there things that were challenging on TSM, or things that surprised you that might help someone if they know it now or early on, if they're just starting TSM or they've been on it for a little while?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think, like I said, if I could do it all over again, I would be in therapy from day one, and I would be on a regimented, structured environment where I was checking in with the clinician or someone who is familiar with TSM, and I was being accountable for my drink units, things that made me feel like there was structure and routine with respect to my drinking. I think left to my own devices, or I just don't think that I don't think I have the discipline to do, I think, what is necessary to do by myself. So I think just having that sort of accountability is really important. I also think too, having the compassion for yourself to know that it took you a really long time to get to a place where alcohol became disruptive in your life. It's going to take a little bit of time to make this thing undisruptive in your life again, or at least get it to a place where it's no longer in your life the way it is, where it's causing, you know, chaos or havoc. So I think just having that compassion and awareness, I think talking to friends and family in a very open and thoughtful and supportive way to let them understand what you're doing, why you're doing what you're doing, and sort of having a recruitment process where there's people in your life that are supporting you. You know, I met so many people in some of these support groups that have family members that are so hard on them because they're not doing it the traditional way. They're not alcoholics and they're telling them this is the way you have to do it. That's insane. You know what I mean? Like, and I get it. They're coming from that place of like, I want my spouse or my partner to get better, but I feel like if someone is seriously taking this seriously, they deserve that level of respect and compassion, so that they can have the room to have the space to really create a life that reflects, I think, the changes they want to make. I think just having an intervention of people that are supporting you in every way, I think is the key to your recovery, or at least that was what was important to me. When I left AA, one of the fears was that I was going to lose all of those wonderful people that I had met. And not only are these people still in my life in a really significant way, they're all still rooting for me, and they're still asking me about TSM, and you know, they're constantly following up, and not one of them, I mean, maybe it's just a reflection on the kind of person I am and what I look for in a friend, but I don't just choose my friends based on a common thing. I look for certain characteristics and certain traits, but all of my friends in traditional recovery, they are, you know, they're, by their mere presence in my life keeps me in a place of like, you know, we're all in recovery, you know, though I don't infiltrate AA. I feel like that would be problematic for me because I'm not a sober person, and I feel like that is a sober space. Just to have those people aligned in my life is very supportive. It's very helpful to me.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much for your time today. Is there anything else you want to say or share before we wrap up for today?
I think I've said a lot.
You have.
I think I have. I think, you know, I just know that this has been such an unexpected, crazy journey in my life. And, you know, I've done things in my life that I'm proudest of, but I think the thing that I carry with me as sort of a banner in my life right now is that I was able to recognize a problem, you know, find a solution, recognize that wasn't the solution for me, and then find the solution that works for me, and sort of stay on that path and, you know, tell the tale. And, you know, I think that took a lot of courage on my part to do that. And, you know, I wish that for anybody else who's struggling with this, because, you know, alcohol use disorder, it can be a really lonely journey. You know, it's a very internal struggle, and there's a lot of shame attached to it, and there's a lot of loneliness attached to it. And, you know, I just feel like that it's important that people know that this is not something they did. This is not a moral failure on their part, and there is a way to fix your life, and there's a way to do it in a way that feels right to you.
Yeah. And I know you've mentioned the word courage a number of times as we've been talking. And I think that that's something for me, I really felt like I had to kind of embody and muster up for myself to kind of forge forward on the method. And
Yeah. Fake it till you make it, as they say.
Exactly.
I mean, that was so like my motto the first year. It was like, I felt so small and foolish and silly and completely like out of my mind with respect to doing something that not many people were doing, but I just acted as if, and until that I really was able to take a deep breath and you know, say, okay, this is working.
Yeah, it's so true. Well, thank you so much, David. I greatly enjoyed speaking with you today.
Katie, you're a rock star. I love you. You're amazing, and thank you for doing what you're doing. I just think the space that you've created is so needed right now, and I think the work that you're doing is really in line with the very best of, you know, what humans can do for other people. So I thank you.
You're a gem. Thanks for sharing your story. Talk soon. Thank you.
All right, Katie. Lots of love. Mwah.